All right, so if you didn't watch my video about why you need survival skills, make sure you watch it because it's going to give this video a lot more context. Now, we're not going to be diving deep into any of these topics, but there are 12, well, can't count them on one hand, but 12 survival skills that apply to pretty much any survival situation. And now, you may not use all 12 of these skills in any one survival scenario. These 12 skills, though, will, however, cover an entire range of survival scenarios that people often find themselves in. The most common one being that search and rescue is called for is actually when people wander off trail. So when you go on a hiking trip, if you don't stay on the path, or when you're traveling from one destination to another and you decide to take a different route than expected. That is the most common reason why people need to call search and rescue in order to find their family members. So let's use these 12 survival skills and know them so that we can be more effective in our research, because you're not going to be able to get all the knowledge at once. I'll actually be releasing videos about each survival skill along the way. However, these are just, again, some topics for you to research more in depth. So the first one is going to be how to stay calm, having a positive mental attitude. You can't make good decisions without staying calm, and so you must know how to do that. The other thing to know is urgency, right? A lot of people have really, really bad urgency in survival or just outdoor situations in general. With really, really bad urgency comes bad planning, and it leads to more emergencies and disasters. So if you're already in a disaster, you don't want to make more. So understand proper urgency. And that's going to be 3 minutes without air. So that covers medical emergencies pretty much. Cleanliness, right? You must stay clean. Shelter, that includes your clothing, right? So if you're wet and it's cold and your clothing is wet and cold, that is an immediate emergency to handle. Water, 3 days without water. And then the last one is food, 3 weeks without food. So understand urgency when making your decisions, because that will help you create a better survival plan and strategy, which comes right into our third skill, which is thinking long term. Now, obviously, we have to eat every day, we have to drink, but if we miss a meal, it's not going to be quite as big of a deal as if we break a leg. So understanding urgency is going to be incredibly important for you to handle different situations that come about, and it's going to help you make better decisions that lead to you hopefully escaping the life-threatening situation that you get involved in. The next one after that is going to be fighting. Now, if you are in a survival situation and you are in a fight for your life, you're not necessarily fighting a person or an animal, but you are in a fight. You might be in a fight against the cold, might be in a fight against a lack of resources. You might be in a fight against a person or a wild animal. So understanding what your opponent is and how to overcome it is going to be vital for you. For example, I was in a fight against the cold. I didn't have to worry about wild animals. So what I did was I did everything possible to make sure I didn't get cold. And then I was able to stay clean and clear-minded enough to avoid encounters with wild animals that I didn't want to have. So that's an example on how you can use your fighting skills to not only overcome a fight, but to avoid one in the first place. That also means you might have to understand weapons and how to use them. So if that's something you're uncomfortable with, make sure you research a weapon system that may be appropriate for you. I highly recommend bear spray or pepper spray. It's a very effective weapon at keeping yourself defended from people and animals. But then the rest of it is going to be your other skills in order to keep yourself safe from other threats that may harm you, like the weather. So moving further along, we've got communication skills. So communication is going to be the next most important thing to understand. So this is 5 and 6. So communication and navigation. If you know where you are and where you're supposed to be, and you go there and other people know it, that's effective communication about your navigation, right? But if you know how to navigate correctly and you haven't communicated to people where you're going to be, that's effective navigation without effective communication, and people aren't going to find you in either situation if one or the other goes incorrectly. So you may not be able to communicate once you're in a survival situation, right? Once I was stuck in the mountains, I had no cell signal. So my cell phone was almost useless. So I had to communicate with pen and paper on the mountain. Now, my family already knew where I was going to be, and so that was effective communication and navigation before the incident. However, once the incident is created, now I have to effectively communicate that I am where I said I am. And so what I did is I walked either direction from where my truck was stuck, left notes, and let people know where I was so that people could find me. And that was effective enough communication for the game warden to travel on the trail that I said I was going to be at because my family told him where I was going to be. He found my note. It verified that I was where I said I was, and he trusted that note to a much greater degree, and he ended up finding me because of those notes, because he was going to turn around because the terrain was getting really nasty, and he thought that this is going to be a waste of time to try to travel through that nasty terrain. So it was good that I left a note. Moving forward is cleanliness. So cleanliness is actually, in my opinion, on the medical urgency level. If you get sick while you are in the middle of an emergency situation, that's as bad as not having shelter, in my opinion. So you want to avoid getting sick at all costs. Now, obviously, if you were already injured, you have to handle that injury first before you can worry about avoiding sickness. But along the way of doing that, you do have to think long term. And thinking long term does mean that when you are treating an injury, you are treating it in a way that has the maximum amount of cleanliness. Also, before you consume water, before you drink food, after you're done using the restroom, make sure that you're washing your hands, because all these things can get contaminated over time if you're not careful enough and create an environment where bacteria can grow. And you definitely want to avoid that. So cleanliness is extremely, extremely important. It actually took me 2 days to create a hand washing station when I was stuck in the woods. So it was very, very inconvenient because I had to boil water in order to wash my hands every single time I had to wash my hands. So I was only eating once a day because of that, because I took my cleanliness seriously, because I knew the consequences of not taking it seriously. Moving forward, we have drinking. Now, we can make a video on every single one of these skills, but drinking water is not as easy as you may think, as it is in survival situations. So understand how to access and find water, but also understand how to purify it once you find it. In order to do that, you probably will have to create a fire. And so having those fire skills is going to go hand in hand with your water skills. So after cleanliness is going to be having water skills, and then having some fire skills on top of that. Next, we're going to go right into shelter. You need to have the ability to find safe shelter or create your own safe shelter. Now, if you are running away from somebody who's trying to rob you and you shelter or barricade yourself into a strange area, you may have escaped that temporary situation, but you may have to find a new place to go. If you're in a city, hopefully you can find resources pretty quickly. But you may not have the luxury of that. You may be in the wilderness, and a cave where there might be bats means that there's bat poop, and bat poop means that there's an unclean environment that you can get sick from. So make sure that you understand how to find a safe shelter. I touched on fire starting because fire starting is involved in purifying drinking water. It's also involved in your shelter because it's probably going to be near your shelter. So obviously there are some obvious things I do have to state. Make sure you're starting a fire in a place where it is actually safe to do so. Or make sure you're starting a fire in a place where you can actually utilize it, because if it's too far away from your camp, you're not going to be able to use your fire. So it has to be effective, but it also can't be in a place that's going to cause danger. Also with fire is you might actually want to practice the real life skill of starting a fire with natural materials, because most people don't know how to start a fire. Most people use a match or a lighter, they use lighter fluid, and they use pre-dried logs. But when you're out in nature, you're oftentimes not finding pre-dried logs. You're finding whatever is just available to you. And that might not be the best that money can buy, obviously, right? So you may not know how to start a fire with less optimal materials. So research fire starting. It's a really cool skill and art, I would actually argue, and make sure that you actually know how to do that skill. All right. So moving on to our last two skills, we've got eating and drinking. Eating. We already covered drinking, but eating. Most people don't understand how to eat in a survival situation. It sounds weird because we eat every day, but most people actually don't have any nutritional education in this country. So understanding nutrition and how food affects your body is going to be vital for you. Also, it is important to be clean and safe. I feel like I did cover that in the cleanliness part of my survival skills, but I'm going to say it again. If your food is not clean and you are eating unclean food, that is going to create a much more urgent situation than starving to death. So it's much better just to not eat than it is to eat unclean food and unsafe food. So understand your nutrition, because you can't just go out there, shoot a deer, and eat a whole deer. Everybody told me, hey, you got stuck in the woods and you had a whole deer in your truck. Well, at least you had plenty of food. That elk was actually mostly unedible because it has very, very little fat. So there are a few fatty parts that I could have cooked up and eaten and got plenty of nutrition from. However, that was not the vast majority of that animal. All right, we're going to move into our last survival skill, which is equipment knowledge or equipment awareness. So keeping an inventory of your equipment is absolutely critical, but also knowing the limitations of your gear and what your gear and equipment can do is going to be super useful. It'll save you from wasting time and energy, and it'll also keep you knowledgeable. So if you know what your gear can do and you have the correct gear for a situation that you think you may have a chance of being in, then you're going to understand how to use it. For example, if you think that you live in a city and somebody may attack you, well, you may want to buy a can of pepper spray, but you may actually want to read the instructions on that pepper spray before you decide to carry it on your person. So hopefully you actually take understanding your gear to just as high of a survival skill as any of the others. Obviously, it's probably lower on the list, but gear does include weapons. And so if you are in a fight for your life, you don't really have time to learn how to use your gear. So it could be potentially a life-saving skill. So I hope you got a lot out of this video. I know it was a lot longer than intended. Please subscribe and like this video, because we're going to be creating more content like this, and I'll be doing individual videos on each one of these topics. And so if you want to learn them on your own from some other channel, definitely feel free to do that. But if you want to learn it over time as I make these videos, then definitely consider being a part of this channel and participating. Comment down below if you got some feedback. I look forward to it, and thank you for watching.